If you are new to using the router, or you are just unsure of how to use these guide bushings, in this video I'm going to show you how. Now, if you've never cut a kitchen worktop with a router or done any kind of template work, then you would be forgiven for not knowing what these are for or really how they work. Every router will come with one or two of these bushings, and you can even buy aftermarket bushings of various sizes. A guide bushing works in a very similar way to a flush trim bit like I've got here. These have bearings on and they run around your template or pattern and create an exact copy of this onto another piece of sheet material or timber. However, there are two main differences between a guide bushing and a flush trim bit. A flush trim bit has this bearing on the bottom, and the diameter of the bearing is exactly the same as the diameter of the cutter. This means that your finished piece will be exactly the same size as your jig or template, but a guide bushing will always be larger than the size of your cutter, allowing it to pass through. So this then requires a little bit of calculation and adjustment when making your templates. Also, because the bearing on a flush trim bit is fixed to the cutter itself, you do need to keep this set at a certain depth where the bearing runs around the template, which doesn't allow you to go round and cut away the excess material in multiple passes. What that means is you've got to take away the excess material either freehand with the router, or to cut a line around your finished material using a jigsaw or a bandsaw. But with the guide bushing fixed to the router itself, you can actually plunge up and down and set your cutter to different heights, therefore making multiple passes, saving the time of cutting away excess material and the potential wear on the cutter itself. This is a 30mm bushing that came with this 1/2 inch router, and this is standard when it comes to cutting kitchen worktops. In fact, a 30mm bushing with a 12.7mm diameter cutter, which is quite long like this one, is what you need when cutting kitchen worktops using a kitchen worktop jig. Anyway, back to my template that I've made for a serving board that I want to make. Because I'm using a guide bushing, I need to make my template smaller than the finished or actual size. I'm using a stock piece of 22mm solid oak that's 220mm wide. I want my finished serving board size to be 214mm wide, so that'll give me 3mm to trim on either edge. And because we need to half that measurement, it means I have to offset and make my template 5.5mm smaller all the way round in order to give me the finished size that I want. Here's that information again that I've written on my template, just in case you missed it. So let's go ahead and double-sided tape this sucker to my oak stock. I want to ensure there is an equal distance all the way round. That feels really well stuck on there. Just before we dive in and start trying to cut this out, I do need to change the base plate on the router because this one isn't compatible with a guide bushing. So let's get the bushing screwed into the base plate. And what's really important here is, because the guide bushing is attached to the router and not the cutter, we need to make sure that this is completely central to the spindle of the machine. Otherwise you might end up with a size and shape that you didn't really want. So we just pop that on there. That's got some countersunk holes, so that just goes into a fixed position. We just do that up, not too tight, just enough. There we go. So that's fixed on the base plate. We've now got to put the base plate on the router. So we'll start off by taking this base off. So that's the old one off. That's the new one on. So what we'll do is just get that fixed into place, but not do these up all the way. So we just get them started. Like so, and you can see that there's movement in this now. So what I'm going to do is just to plunge the machine down a bit and then lock that off there. And then that's where our centering cone tool comes in. So if you've seen one of these in your toolbox with your router, this is what it's for. So I'm going to drop that into there. I'm going to tighten up the collet just a little bit. Doesn't need to be really tight. Like so. And then I'm going to release the plunge again. And then what that's going to do is to hold that whole base completely central to the spindle. It's still got movement, but it's only rotating like so, as you can see. So we'll just put that roughly in the middle of those holes, and then we can just tighten those off. Like so. So we'll just loosen that off just enough so we can get that out and then release the plunge. So there we go. We've got our base plate on, our guide bushing on, and that is completely central now to the spindle. So now we can put our cutter in, and what a beast of a cutter that is, let me tell you. What I do need to do is to plunge this down a little way. Not going to go too far, like so. And then we can put the cutter in. Obviously make sure it's always to or slightly beyond the minimum depth recommended into the collet. So just get that locked in, there we go, and then we can just tighten it off with the spanner. And now I can adjust the depth and cut this serving board in multiple passes. If you find that you're taking too much material off as you're going round, what you can do is just trim this. So I might just take a bit more of this away on the bandsaw. Now that really was a thick lump of material, and I couldn't have chosen a harder material to cut either. So that did take a bit of work. I did go through 22mm solid oak in 4 passes, but that has given me a really nice finish. We'll just get that sanded up and that's going to start looking lovely. But the first thing I need to do is try and get this template off. Here it comes. There we go. Now the finished size of this should be 214, and you can obviously see that it is larger than the template. It should be approximately 11 mil, but let's see, this should be 214. That is absolutely spot on. Let's give it a quick clean up around the edges. Now, considering this is really hard wood and I basically went 360 degrees all the way around the grain, I've actually got no breakout whatsoever, which I'm really pleased about. So exactly the same can be done if you're using a trimmer router or a 1/4 inch plunge router, whatever you guys want to call it. You should have a centering pin cone with it, which will go into your 1/4 inch collet. And here I've got another base plate similar to the 1/2 inch router, which you can attach the guide bushing to and use the centering tool in the same way. However, I probably wouldn't use this router to cut this. That really was tough, but it sure is going to make somebody a nice thick serving board. I really do hope this video has helped, and if you do have any thoughts or questions, then I would love to hear them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.